He was looking around for something else to get into, and the Shock Theater package of all the Universal monsters had dropped on television, and there was a fandom beginning, and there was a lot of talk about kids waiting in line around the block to go see Dracula when it was reissued in theaters and such. So he was like, well, let's do a monster magazine, but let's make it Playboy for monsters. And as you can, if you've ever seen the cover for the first issue of Famous Monsters, it's almost exactly that, right? Mm-hmm. It's Jim Warren wearing a mask with a pipe, looking like like a Hefner monster with a buxom blonde.
Right.
So that was his brief on that. It was going to just be a one shot, but it shot.
Well, I think Forey Ackerman, when he got involved,
yeah.
Forey Ackerman had come to Jim Warren and said, I've got this idea, and you should do this. And when Jim Warren allowed Forey to sort of take the helm, and it allowed Jim to literally just sit back and collect money because it was an instant hit. And so then he just dabbled in anything because he had that flexibility, but also it garnered a reputation for him as a merchandising guru. So Mattel, all these other toy companies were calling Jim Warren saying, can you consult for us on what monster things we can do to make money? So he was just making money hand over fist.
And would you guys agree that Monsterama itself would not almost, it wasn't for Famous Monsters Family, you could almost make a direct line to everything that we're here and we love.
I would say that none of us would be here or even give a shit about any of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's one magazine.
Right, yeah. I mean, and the things that spun out of that magazine, and the imitators and the aggregation of the time and all those people, all those kids who loved Famous Monsters because that was a nexus for them. Yeah, they could go to the playground and talk with their pals at school about these things, but knowing that there were other people around the country and eventually around the world that were into it as well. And
letter pages in there, yeah. Right.
Oh, well, and Famous Monsters is the Aurora monster model kits are a direct result of the success of Famous Monsters.
Correct, yeah.
I think Shock Theater probably was more successful because of Famous Monsters.
It was 100%.
Reciprocal. It was just
absolutely.
They kind of all fed on each other, but Forey was, he was, a literary agent for a lot of sci-fi writers, Ray Bradbury included for a while, and he had been collecting all of these stills since he was a kid. Basically lived in Hollywood, would just go around and say, hey, can I have pictures from your movies? And they would just give him, stacks and stacks of these things. So he was uniquely poised to create this thing and understood that the appeal was directly to about, 8 to 14-year-old boys, and so wrote in a voice of a 14 or honestly younger boy, and was very full of puns and that kind of humor of the time, and people, just resonated with it. The kids just really resonated with what he was putting out there, and Warren was dude, as long as we're selling like this, you can do whatever you want to.
Well, one of the stories about Forey Ackerman was that he would tell people that he wanted to do more serious articles,
right?
But that Jim Warren would literally hold up a sign and say, I am a 10-year-old boy, make me laugh.
Right.
Now, knowing Forey's ability to write, I challenge whether he could have written more serious articles, but he was a master of puns, but he was also such a diehard fan himself that I'm sure, I don't know if any of you know, but Forey got paid $300 for the first issue of Famous Monsters to edit it, and got paid $300 for the last issue that he did. He never got a raise in all those years, but he was a literary agent for Heinlein, L. Ron Hubbard, Ray Bradbury. So I think he already had and he had family money, I believe, too.
He did have family money, and also he was not a monster guy.
He was a sci-fi guy.
He really didn't care all that much about it unless there was a sci-fi element. So it was interesting, and that was another thing that he would lament about. It's like, I think when Star Wars turned the tables on that kind of stuff, he was very happy to kind of refocus towards sci-fi.
Absolutely, and I'm sure we all did this, but maybe a lot of you also Red Spaceman magazine that Warren put out in '61. I mean, I was born in '61, so when I was 10 years old, I was ordering the back issues of Spaceman from Warren Publishing for 50 cents a copy.
Right.
And I actually, at one point, I don't know if it was after a Christmas one year or whatever, but I sent $3 plus if there was even postage. And I got 6 issues. And that has been my treasure.
So you got a complete run, all 9 issues?
I have a complete run, 1 through 8 plus the 65 yearbook. I was at the Acker Mansion in 1990 before I started Monster Scene. Don Post Jr. from Don Post Masks took me to meet Forey, and Forey had the original art from the 65 yearbook cover.
Oh, wow.
And it was Wally Wood and Larry Todd, I think, did that together, and I wanted that so much.
And you know, before he had, if you visited him when he was open, he had an open house every Saturday at the Acker Mansion. And in his living room, he had stacks and stacks and stacks of these old magazines, which you could just buy on the way out, which was fantastic too. Does anybody? I'm sure if you read any of those magazines that Warren put out, you saw all the ads, the catalog pages in the back for the Captain Company. You guys know why the Captain Company existed? Anybody know? Because nobody would buy an ad in Famous Monsters or these horrific comic books because they didn't want their brand associated with it. So Warren was a very canny fellow. He's like, okay, if I can't sell ads, then I have to sell merchandise. And these guys are, all these kids who are reading it want it. I can put a warehouse out in New Jersey and get it fulfilled from there for next to nothing. And that's how he supported that empire. Beyond, you know, newsstand sales has always been, honestly, and I am not exaggerating, a racket. It was run by Teamsters who were run by the mob, and there was almost no profit in actual sales of magazines for years and years and years.
Because you made all your money on advertising.
Exactly, from
Definitely.
the advertising. So, once Famous Monsters took off, they also did Monster World for 10 issues, which was kind of an offshoot / replacement for Famous Monsters. It's a kind of a weird little story that I don't want to get too into because it's not that interesting. But in Monster World, they had some comics, some original monster comics that apparently really fared well with their audience. And so he was like, well, if these do well in there, maybe we should try, you know.
And we should mention that I think Jim Warren was a fan of a certain company from the 50s. EC Comics.
And again, in a very canny move, when he started, what was the first one? Was Eerie, right?
He started Creepy.
Creepy, sorry. Yeah. So when he started Creepy, he knew that the Comics Code Authority was going to come down on these if they published them as regulation-sized comics. They couldn't really go to the newsstand with them unless they had the Comics Code Authority, you know, seal of approval on them. So he's like, well, I don't want that kind of story. Nobody cares about that kind of story in a horror book. So he made them magazine sized so that they would not fit on the spinner racks, and so no one would confuse them with kiddie comics, and made newsstand and retailers put them on the magazine racks, which was brilliant.
It was brilliant, and in hindsight, and I'm sure it was just because the artists were available at the time, but you know, the first 10 issues of Creepy, I think every major EC artist was featured in Creepy. You had, first of all, Roy Krinkle did the logo designs, and he did the cover mock-ups for Frazetta to paint off of. You had Reed Crandall doing interior art. Yeah, Jack Davis did the cover of the first issue.
Absolutely.
And then Jack, I think, did a couple of the inside
And he gathered all the Fleeger, Frazetta,
Williamson, right, Torres, Angelo Torres is in there, and
we should go. Just we ought to make a side note here, because it only lasts from 1960 to 65, but he also did Help.
Oh my gosh, that Harvey Kurtzman magazine, that's right.
And of course Harvey. It's interesting. I know the EC influence and everything. Mad Magazine is going full tilt here now, and hit the zeitgeist, and it's a magazine, and it was the remnant of EC Comics, and everything else got canceled out and stopped. So Harvey goes to Hefner first, and of course,
Gaines kind of was like, well, thanks for those first, 6 or 8 issues, but we're going to move it into into the magazine format now, and that's not gonna be a comic.
Well, that was the piece of Harvey too, because Harvey wanted to, everybody thinks it was to avoid the code, it was more the piece of Harvey.
Right.
Because Harvey was the secret ingredient, and Gaines was, determined, well, we gotta keep Harvey happy and everything. But then Hugh Hefner did his, because Hefner's a big comic book person.
Well, Hefner was a cartoonist himself.
Yeah, exactly. So he gets Harvey to do Trump, I think.
Different
Trump.
Trump.
And then Hefner had an economic bump, and he had to pull the plug on it because he was giving Harvey a lot of money and looked gorgeous, and Harvey stole a lot of the EC artists with him. So then Harvey decides to try his own hand at it, this humbug. And again, it lasted several issues, but it was cheap and it didn't last and then so. I don't know. You guys know? He go to Warren, or Warren came to him and said, "Hey,
I think Warren came to him.
Yeah.
Historically, Warren always sought out anything that was successful. He would always try to get the person in charge of it to come to him.
Yeah.
Right.
So he's going to hopefully Harvey will a third time try at this. Help's going to give Bad a run for its money and let Harvey. And it's an interesting scenario because it wasn't really successful. It was pretty iffy, but Terry Gilliam was one of his assistant editors in that film, and they did this thing called Fumetti's, and Fumetti is, a comic book story done with photographs. And an actor, an English actor that was in New York at the time, showed up for one of them was John Cleese.
Right.
And so Terry makes a connection with John Cleese, and we know the rest of the history of that later down the road. I assume everybody knows,
Obviously. And so Gilliam really learned the rhythm and the beats of visual storytelling with Harvey Kurtzman at this magazine, The Warren Public.
And early underground guys showed up. Robert Crumb's in it. Gilbert Sheldon, I think is in it.
Gilbert Sheldon's in it. A few of the underground guys.
And they would actually, Harvey had made connections, and everybody knew that he was, so the people in the know he created Mad. So like Ernie Kovacs would show up for a cover, or Jerry Lewis is even on the cover. So anyway, that's an interesting, and it kind of gets lost in the shuffle with famous monsters and creepy and eerie, but it's an interesting little side history there on that.
Absolutely.
When you really look back at Warren Publishing, the influence that they had that people don't even know about. I mean, I don't want to insult any woman in here by saying this, but I would imagine that Gloria Steinem became a hardcore feminist because she worked as Jim Warren's assistant and was probably subjected to male chauvinism constantly on and out.
Yes, exactly.
And so, but she worked directly at Warren Publishing.
Right.
And
to me, it's just amazing. It's kind of the Olduvai Gorge of counterculture birth.
Yeah.
Warren Publishing. Who would have thought, right? Robert Crumb, Gloria Steinem, and all these guys.
Terry Gilliam.
Terry Gilliam. Guys who went on to become these enormous movers and shakers in movements, in entertainment, and in culture. All out of Warren.
And poor Harvey, it did, help, only lasted 28 issues, but he's, amongst comic book history, comic book fans, he's in the Mount Rushmore. And we wouldn't have had Matt if it's, no matter how it was much changed by the time, but it was, Matt came from Harvey. So anyway.
Yeah, and one thing I was actually just thinking as we were talking about it, I'm wondering if Harvey went back to Playboy to do Little Annie Fanny. I wonder if that was a way of getting him back.
Well,
because I know he made a fortune on that artwork for those stories.
Oh, it's one of the most gorgeous. It's the comics. The narratives and the stories are not that great, but it's the most gorgeous comic.
Oh yeah, Wolf Rosetta helped out.
Yeah, Russ Heath.
Yeah.
One time I was talking to Russ Heath, and we had one of the collections of Little Annie Fanny, and we were showing it to him, and Russ is like going, "Well, if Rosetta did that leg,
yep.
I did that arm." He's like breaking it down, who did what in this one. Jack Davis worked on it. So, now you made me think of something I forgot, so go ahead. But Help was really, and we're going to talk about another, it's a little bit down in 65, but Blazing Combat, and Blazing Combat was another EC resurrection of what comic books, Frontline Combat and the other one.
Aces High.
And Harvey was the one who was doing the war books,
Right.
you know, and yeah. So anyway, we're jumping ahead on that.
And isn't it interesting that those Blazing Combat had the anti-Vietnam war ads? Warren was
Yeah, that's what,
so anti-Vietnam and used that magazine of all magazines to do. Here's a war comic with anti-war.
Which probably led to the demise of the magazine.
Right.
Pete, actually, they did some
Yeah.
core audience.
Because this is, if you think about it, this is like 1965, it's right after it like, kind of like turned into an actual,
A war,
from a
right.
police action into a war.
Right.
And he was like right on top of it.
We should step backwards and say creepy now. What we need to start with creepy, but Blazing Combats was a result of creepy, so we haven't started talking about creepy yet.
And Creepy was so successful it led to Eerie.
And then years later to Vampirella.
Yes.
But also Comics International, Warren started that because he wanted to make money on the underground.
Yes.
Right? And that's why comics is spelled with an X, just because that, you know, and
That's
I think that was the first instance of that being associated with underground comics.
Absolutely.
Next, right? Yeah, yeah.
That starts in '74.
Right.
And we're really jumping ahead in the spirit. We want to let's backtrack a little bit.
but you know, Warren, my introduction to Will Eisner's The Spirit was because of Warren. I didn't know about it before. I mean, I think I was 12 or 13. Thank you for the cheat sheet.
It makes it so much easier,
So
right?
74,
Yeah.
so I was in 8th grade.
Yeah.
And I remember going into the newsstand and seeing this, and it said a Warren magazine, so I bought it because it's what I did, and fell in love with Will Eisner.
Yeah, that's an interesting story too, because Eisner kept the rights to the Spirit, and the Spirit is one of those. If you are into comic books, it's a game changer when you discover it. You're like, oh, it doesn't have to be all guys in underwear fighting each other.
And it doesn't have to be comic books. The Spirit was a Sunday supplement for newspapers
hybrid,
all over the
actually.
country. Yeah. I mean, it was comics, but it was not a newsstand comic. It was in every newspaper on
And
Sunday.
it was edgy noir stories.
It really was.
I mean, he really was the
Yeah.
grandfather of graphic novels.
So he kept he was very canny. He was always business savvy, and he kept the rights to it. So first, when the superhero craze started going crazy in the early '60s, Harvey jumped in, and they said, "Hey, Willow, can we do spirits?" They did 2 spirits, but the superhero craze died out with all the smaller companies. So those 2, but people loved it. The kids that did discover it, and Eisner did some new work for those. And then Dennis Kitchen, an underground guy in his own company, he loved Spirit, and he did 2 undergrounds. But Jim Warren also loved Eisner and loved the Spirit. And he goes, Mr. Eisner, I can give you this much money, and I can start reprinting your stuff in a magazine and big distribution as opposed to the head shops. And Eisner went to Dennis and said, "I'm sorry," and Dennis, "No, I understand." Said, "Go for it," you know.
Well, you know, Warren tried to hire Dennis
Oh, did he?
Kitchen
Yes,
for
he did.
a long time. He wanted him to actually run
Makes sense.
that, and Dennis considered it for a long time.
Yeah.
But he ultimately decided not to.
And then Stan, of course, gets Dennis, and,
Right.
they try their, competition
Right.
against Warren,
Right.
with the comics.
And,
Right.
and if you don't know who Stan is, he means Stanley. Stanley.
Stanley from Mark.
Yeah, we're going all kinds of wormholes here.
Yeah.
That's right, we are.
But okay, we're here to
But
talk
that's,
about
I mean, that's the beauty
Warren,
of what
so
we're
we
talking
should be
about, and we're
this,
talking about,
right?
and all of these things that connect back to him that most people don't know about.
We all know Famous Monsters.
Yes.
And Warren is associated with Famous Monsters.
Here's something that nobody else seems to know about Famous Monsters. All of that amazing lettering and fonts and things that are in Amazing Monsters, all hand done by who? Jim Warren. Jim Warren did all the graphic design for those issues, including all the lettering.
And then you had really, and then those famous monsters, and that's famous monsters. We can start talking about creepy. I was going to bring up Archie Goodwin.
Yes, Archie
yeah.
Goodwin. He did have a bit of a time keeping editors happy.
Yes.
His comics, so.
But he has some good editors.
He has some great
And
editors.
and the issues that they are involved in are the really good issues you guys remember, as opposed to when they had the down periods.
And he was one of the, if not the first guy to hire a female editor in comics. I don't know.
Oh, Louise Jones.
Right, yeah. Louise Simonson, Cole Simonson's wife now, was editor of those books for 6 years.
Wheezy.
When she was
Wheezy,
married
yeah.
to Jeff Jones.
When she was married to Jeff Jones, right, exactly, who then had his own.
I'm surprised he never got Jeff to do any artwork.
Oh, no, Jeff's on the cover of
Right.
Vampirella number 3 or 4.
Really? Okay, yeah, I
It's
forgot.
Jeff Jones and Vaughn Bodie,
Coming in
like a
the
cover to get comic book.
Oh, wow.
But I think there's some other Jeff Jones in
There
Warren.
is.
Oh,
Jeff,
yeah,
yeah, he's very limited. I mean, I remember he did a Flash Gordon for Charles. And I was like,
And the other thing about Jeff Jones at the time, certainly, maybe for the rest of his life, he was very slow.
yeah.
He
Oh,
worked
that's
very
I'm sure,
meticulously
yes.
and very slowly,
Right.
and so it was never easy for him to do things on demand.
Right.
And-
Whereas we had a lot of Frazetta in the early flush of creepy and eerie, and we even get, I think technically his last comic book stories were creepy or eerie, whatever one it appeared in, that jungle
Yeah,
story.
the jungle story.
Yeah, I think it's his last one.
And it's a beautiful story too. You know, considering that was the end of his comic career, that's some of his nicest work.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, obviously he, started doing assist on Will Abner and had gone into his own Johnny Comet and then the EC stuff. But that last
Yeah, it's
story was
beauty.
excellent. You know, Warren, Vampirella. I mean,
Oh yes, we ought to go.
oh yeah.
But we just say creepy was successful, and so he thought, well, I'm going to do another one, and they had horror hosts, and, so everything was patterned after EC Comics. So Eerie, but remember the interesting thing about Eerie is there was rumbles of another company starting up,
Oh yeah, Eerie Publications.
and they were going to use the word Eerie, and he wanted to use the word Eerie, so he rushed the ash can
Yeah.
copy of Eerie #1. So it's always been a confusing history for a lot of fans. And it was reprints of Creepy, I think.
It was mimeograph reprints of Creepy.
Yes,
Yeah, it was horrible quality,
right.
but because he was
Copyrighted,
so
trademarked.
successful on the newsstand, he was able to get it in there and get it on the shelves so that it beat Eerie Publications to their first issue.
Right.
Didn't he do that House of Horrors also?
Yeah, well, when Hammer was when they were doing their, that House of Horror comic in England, and then Warren, but it didn't succeed.
Right.
That one, he only did that one issue, and that was a Ken Kelly, Karloff Frankenstein
Yeah,
cover, I think.
Yeah, I don't have the one shots listed on
Yeah.
there, so they.
Right.
So,
But because there's an interesting one shot we'll mention later. But I thought it was really interesting. I have to pause and interject about the Eerie publications. Boy, you just got such quality of I'll read all the EC guys and the new guys showing. He nabs Ditko for about 3 issues, a 7-issue run.
You're bearing the lead. Such quality of Warren, not an Eerie.
Yeah, Warren. Yeah, and the fact, so Eerie, the Eerie publication goes ahead and starts flooding the market with these really, I almost felt like dirty when I looked at them. And green. You guys know what I'm talking about? These really grade C horror magazines. And now there's this big, interesting comeback on them, and they were, but they're charging all kinds of money for them.
am I wrong to say though, looking at them now, they're not as bad as you thought when you were a kid?
With the guns,
Yeah, some of the art, oh no, I think some of the art in it,
well, it depends on the artist. There's that one artist that,
the Mexican or
Yeah.
South American
Yes,
artist,
yes,
and they're
but
like, wow, this is
People
really
who thought
good.
Jim Warren was a penny-pinching bastard had no clue until they started seeing what was going through an area where they would literally cut original art panels out and just make up a new story based on whatever art they had laying around. It made no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, there's a
No sense.
couple of books that have come out in the last few
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, so that's what I was
There's a story about like one of the publishers like holding a gun on an editor
I know.
who was going to quit, and he said, no, you're not quitting, and he held a gun on him. And like,
But if you guys really, if you're, just a quick note, if you're really interested, yeah, that one book, on Eerie Publications, is a must read.
Yeah.
And once I started reading, I couldn't put it down. And they were basically, he grabbed up all these, I forgot the publisher name, he was a Golden Age guy. Bob Foss, yeah, was it? They pre-Cold Wars, they were pre-Cold horror stories. And then some were, he was using them for, get Dick Ayers or somebody to redraw it, or they were actually using the actual original story. So they had a really weird feel because they were pre-code. And then I remember the story would, the last page of the last story would be on the back cover.
Right.
And it was just really, and you would just avoid those like the plague. You know, and they'd be over the corner, you just like, oh no. And if you got any money, it's going to creepy or eerie, it's not going to, Vampirella, it's not going to go to these things. But now there's a really weird, interesting cult developed on it.
On to more esoteric things. Once everybody did kind of like get tired of Jim Warren stuff, the artists mainly and editors, he wound up being approached by a guy who had a studio full of Spanish artists.
Right, yes.
And he brought in samples, and Jim Warren was like, how much do these guys charge? And it was nothing, basically. It was
$90
next
a page.
Yeah, it was next to nothing compared to what Bernie Wrightson wanted. Yeah. And these were guys who were like Jose Gonzalez and Esteban Maroto and San Julian and all. They revolutionized the look of Vampirella, and Creepy and Eerie. Everything that they did now had these unbelievably gothic Art Nouveau. There was a much more painterly designed eye applied to them, and that's when I really got into them. Because in the '60s, I was born in '64, so I was not around for these. I read them later in reprints, but then in the '70s, when the Spanish guys started, I was like, what the heck is this? This doesn't look like anything else.
No.
Yeah.
But do you know that the reason Warren was able to get Bernie Wrightson to stay and do work for him was because Bernie was so blown away by the quality of the Spanish artists, and especially Jose Gonzalez. I mean, Jose Gonzalez' run of Vampirella stories is, in my opinion, some of the best comic work ever done. And,
I agree.
And then we get, there's a really good book on, we were discussing it. It's a read, it's something you should read, but it's maybe not all the research is all Jim Warren biography by Bill Shelley.
Right. A little of the research is off at least, but it's an interesting read.
And it gives you a lot of insight. But I always thought it was amazing that, Ditko, I think it was right when he quit Spider-Man, or right around the period where he's leaving Marvel, goes back to Charlton. He does about 6-7 stories, and it's some of the best. It's Steve Ditko at his best. I mean, it was wash toner. It was something he was doing, experimenting in Creepy and Eerie.
But think about that statement you're making about Ditko. Look at Reed Crandall. Reed Crandall never did the quality of work in EC that he did in Creepy.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember.
It was a different age. Well, he kind of, I love the Crandall of Creepy and Eerie.
I do too.
I grew up on.
To me, that was like the Hammer film of comic.
Yeah,
right.
And
just
exactly the hatching, the shadows, the darkness, and then Neil Adams actually shows up in it and does a story with it was Carl Nelson's story, I think, and then Alan Williamson shows up in it, and then of course the Blazing Combat was just like all the great artists were in that one. Russ Heath and presented doing covers and everything else. And then another guy, which, took a while before most of the fandom caught up to him, was Alex Toth. He's an artist. Everybody, if you really into art, you go, this guy's amazing.
And if you were a kid in the '70s and watched any Hanna-Barbera animation at all that was designed for stuff. Well, the non-funny stuff.
Yeah.
Including the live action stuff. He designed all the concept art for Danger Island on Banana Split.
Chongo, that's right.
Chongo. It was it was fun. And then I love later, way down the road when Jim's doing whatever, or if I don't know how involved Jim was, they would collect an all Ditko issue or an all Alex Toth issue, and because the direct sale market was around, and people like me and who now recognize I want Ditko, I want Toth. Oh, it's all here in one little package.
And then into this second era of Warrenism, as I have just coined. A Messiah appears, named Richard Corbin.
Oh yeah,
Right?
Corbin.
Holy crap, I've never seen colors like that in my entire life at the time. And I was like, how did they, and I'm a graphic designer, I know print production inside and out, and I still am amazed. Richard Corbin would draw pen and ink artwork, and then he would take airbrushes and create by eye in his mind color separations from airbrush illustration like that. So he would have to figure out in his mind, he did this. All right, right, so this percentage of gray on this one, which represents cyan, will then go to the magenta plate, which is this, and then the yellow plate, blah, 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 blah. It needs another 2% black, black plate. In his mind, he did this. What took computers, 40, 60 years to learn. He did it instinctually and created color gamuts that no one has ever reproduced, computers included. It's amazing to me.
Yeah, I love that series of stories he did with the the dinosaur, the couple that lost in time.
And obviously, he's probably most well known for his work for heavy metal, Dan, and stuff like that. And there are some amazingly beautiful reproduction books coming out now that I highly recommend.
Dark Horse.
Yeah, Dark
Was
Horse.
Dark Horse doing them?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they did.
The Ruby is the one.
He is, and he worked with Richard, so he knows it. He knows how Richard's mind worked. So, he's doing a great job coloring them himself, which is, I just can't even, can you imagine being like, okay, we're gonna go back and remake all of Richard Burton's or Marlon Brando's films, and you're gonna play Brando or Burton. Like, no thanks. Yeah, I would not want that, man.
I think you should do it.
What are you talking about? So that really blew my mind on so many levels. The artwork, the storytelling. He was a singular talent that I've never seen anybody like. And I hate that I never met him. I became very good friends with Bernie Rice and some of these other guys whose stuff made such an impact on my life. But I never met Corbin. And I don't know. There are people who worked with him. I think he was one of those guys that if he respected your work, then he was your friend, and if he thought you were a climber or a hanger-on, he kind of told you to get off.
Well, he lived a normal, family life.
I know.
In Missouri,
He was taught.
He was in Indiana or someplace right, wasn't he?
I think in Pennsylvania.
No, it was more Midwest. It was like
Midwest?
Missouri or Kansas.
Missouri or
Okay.
Kansas. Yeah.
Kansas City.
Yeah,
Kansas City. There
I
you
saw
go.
him in one
Okay.
show in Kansas City. He was very nice, but very, very, very shy.
Lucky man.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
you get to meet him because he didn't do many cons.
Right.
Many appearances.
Yeah, I don't
Sam,
know.
the art expert, because he knows everything, because he's got such an amazing collection of art.
Very good. Very good. Thank you,
I'm
Sam.
an ex-Warren writer. I wrote a couple articles for Famous Monsters.
Oh, brilliant. Well, not for nothing, man. I run this show. You should let me know these things in advance.
I want to get back just real quick to the spirit. That line I was following was that I keep on coming across in comic book history people my age, when our age, some of us that came out, it just blew our mind what a comic book could be all about. And so you got Don Cook, just a lot of guys. I should have made a list of that. I didn't get all my homework done, but there was. It's like it was like a Roger Corman did for movie directors and stuff. The guys that read that Spirit Warren magazine became great comic book artists in their own right, and that was the zero, ground zero for them. So.
Now, Corbin did the coloring on a couple of the covers for Spirit.
Yeah, and so he would take some of the Spirit stories and put them in comic international.
Right.
Yeah, just to get cross-pollinated.
Right. That first issue of the Spirit was Eisman like, you can't send this out. This is not approved. And so Warren had Basil Gogos do a color painting and then overlaid Will's pencils on an acetate and shot that, and it's a beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a great kind of an evolution for the Spirit, which was always flat color.
Right.
Stuff before that. So to see it painted like that was done by a master.
And I want to mention that how you ordered your issues of Spaceman. I remember seeing the ads in this thing, and of course I was at the tail end. I started buying comic books and stuff on the tail end of the Batman 66 craze. So I think superheroes was just crazy everywhere. So he put out Superheroes magazine #1, and that was just a cobbling reprints of past.
It was articles about cereals, man.
Cereal, because you had to pan out Captain America
Spin
series.
Thrills.
Yeah, I think he had drawn, I think he just reprinted it.
Right.
It's a one shot. Yeah, it was real quickly to take advantage of the
Batman
Batman.
TV show.
And I just wanted that so bad. I just saw that cover. I gotta have that. I got, not knowing you just, Captain America, the Phantom, and Captain Marvel, who's now Shazam for a lot of kids. And I think I ended up getting a banged up copy from a kid in the neighborhood. That's how I got my copy eventually. Still have it to this day. I remember, and it was a little bit of a letdown. It wasn't why I thought I was going to be by the cover. But there's Jim again, just any craze, jumping the bandwagon and we taking advantage of it. But those ads, I would just, and my dad had Spike Jones records, and there's a Spike Jones doing monsters, remember that cover? And I was just always in the Wally Wood. There was these adaptations of classic stories on vinyl, and they got Wally Wood to draw the cover. Well, I don't know who did that.
Those were Bell Records.
Bell Records had Wally Wood covers, and they had ads for those all the time.
All the time. And those covers are amazing. The audio on those are terrible.
Yes, that's what I hear.
The adaptation they looked at the art and said, let's make up our own story. What are some names of characters who had appeared in this originally, and we'll just incorporate them. But those covers were phenomenal. And also, I got into Hal Foster, Prince Valiant, because of the ad for those Prince Valiant books that were the prose adaptations from Harrison House or something. But they were hardcovers, but they clipped art from Hal Foster to make those hardcover books, and those are gorgeous books to this day.
And I think that a lot of us who had not been exposed to a lot of that kind of work, seeing it juxtaposed next to the stuff that we were interested in, the creepy and eerie and Van Brown and stuff like that, and then you see a Hal Foster Prince Valiant thing or a Flash Gordon, you just go, wow, these are fantastic looking. I don't know that I care about Prince Valiant, but I love that art, and I want to see that. I ordered those from there,
Oh, yeah.
I found out about Tarzan from there, all the Vern Hogarth stuff that I picked up from there, which is just sublime. So he really had a proliferative effect.
Kind of like early proto-Bud Plant to this day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, absolutely. Actually, that's a really great analogy. I mean, because Bud Plant, so many people learn about comic artists because of his catalog.
Yeah.
Right.
And really, that's what the back of all the Warren magazines was. I still regret, getting the Spaceman magazines, 5 years after the last issue came out, because I wanted to order the spacesuit for $2.98.
Right.
A real, authentic Air Force spacesuit for $2.98.
Oh,
Which was
wow.
not really a spacesuit, it was a high
I know.
altitude pressure suit. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, it was $2.98 or
He
something
bought
like
Army
that.
surplus.
Yeah.
And I was always very curious about the Don Post masks. I was always just like, dude, are they that good? Or did they really, is it gonna really, I never ordered one, never got
I
one.
did.
They were expensive.
I ordered the skull mask because it was one of the $8.95 ones.
I thought it was the 19.
But I wanted, $39.95 I wanted
Yeah,
that
it was
Vern Langdon zombie.
Yeah.
And Vern Langdon sold 3 total from the ads on the back of Warren magazines.
That's
3 of them. And he made about 10.
Yeah.
And I have a recast of one now.
It's amazing.
So how was it when you got your, the one you did order at the time? Were you let down? Were you happy with it?
Oh no, it was a beautiful mask. I actually had it until just a couple of years ago. It was a good, solid vinyl. But I ended up becoming a Don Post mask collector. My very patient, dear wife allowed me to have most of those masks in my collection for a long time. And
Until she really finally had it.
Off with this
No.
hat. Oh, they were in this.
no, not at all. We downsized, and I had to become a grown-up and realize, okay, I'm in my 60s and we want to retire, so. And the poor sucker who bought the majority of my collection is a doctor who wants to open a monster shop when he retires. And he bought almost everything from my collection.
Wow.
That was awesome.
So-
Also, I wanted to mention now, with 1984,
Yeah.
Oh,
Warren magazine, that was a direct response to heavy metal.
Heavy metal.
He did not want to lose his shelf space.
Right.
well, and I was hanging out with comic book shops. Now comic book shops are in the direct mark starts, And I want to say in this era, this phase, and 1984 came out in 78, so the early days of the direct sale market. But I remember I was put in charge of ordering comic books, and the Warren magazines, they were just, by that time, it was just like, okay, they were an afterthought into what we were wanting to order, and I don't know who was the editor by, was it Bill DeVay by then, or is it?
It probably was Bill DeVay, because he was doing kind of everything.
Yeah.
Who was the guy that did the Rook that took over for Dubé? I can't remember his name now, but he wouldn't go into the office. He was like, screw you, I'm staying in Long Island.
And that's the Rook was a spin out. They actually started doing some storylines in Creepy and Eerie that were had continuity.
Right.
And then these are people responding to this. Let's spin out this.
And they were things that Warren didn't own. So this guy was smart enough to say, I'm keeping my copyright, I'm working from my office, my studio, and if you want it, then we will deliver it to you and you may print it as you receive it. And when Dubé left, he had no prospective editors whatsoever, so this guy became the editor of all the books. It's kind of a, at that point also, I think Warren's wife or something became sick, and
Forey's wife. Warren, I don't know if he was ever married,
oh, you're right.
because he
Right.
still had the same girlfriend recently.
Yeah,
He's had it on and off for.
his mother got sick.
And Famous Monster ends.
His mother got
His
sick.
mother-
Famous Monster ends in '83.
Right.
Yes.
And I don't think we even ordered any from the store. But we did. We go, okay, we're going to carry the Rook. We'll carry 1984, the Goblin for its 2-3 issues. But I remember thinking, these are kind of, we didn't put much stock in them, and we did low orders on those.
So when the direct market kind of like came on in force in the early '80s, he just wasn't prepared for the numbers that they were giving him. His mother got sick. He had to take care of her. He lost his Hamptons mansion out there because of all of this, and he just kind of went into seclusion for 30 years.
Well, he did. I mean, I know the bankruptcy broke his heart. It
Yeah.
wasn't just
And didn't he show up at the auction just to cry, basically, I think?
Well, he was trying to salvage things,
Yeah.
but they literally, when he lost his office, there were guys, there's a guy named Greg Theakston who, literally
Greg
went
was a
dumpster diving outside of the Warren offices. That's why the Jack Davis 6-foot Frankenstein poster original art was salvaged.
Oh my gosh.
About 400 pages of Jose Gonzalez Vampirella art was salvaged out of a dumpster. All of it eerie.
Greg wound up in Atlanta and was
Right.
Monsterama guest 2 or 3 times.
But he had all those monster pins that they sold,
Yeah.
the Creepy and Eerie
Right.
fan club stuff.
Yeah.
All of that stuff was just thrown away, and the intellectual properties. Now, Warren was able to keep Creepy and Eerie, and I'll tell that story about how he approached me and my darling
Tell
wife
it
to buy it.
briefly. Tell it briefly. because-
Yeah, I will tell it briefly. But, he lost Vampirella to a competitor of his, Stanley Harris, who published Musician Magazine and Knitting magazines. And he really shouldn't have lost it. But Creepy and Eerie he was able to keep, and he maintained that for years. And when I was publishing Monster Scene, I got a letter from him saying, well, you really are infringing on my rights. And at the same time, I got hateful emails, threatening letters from Ray Ferry, who was publishing Famous Monsters at the time, accusing me of plagiarism. And so I showed him side by side my interview with Boris Karloff that was recorded and his. And I had transcribed the entire thing from a friend in Canada who had the tapes. And I deliberately changed several lines. And then Ray Ferry published those lines. So I pointed out the tape and how he actually infringed on me. But Jim Warren said, well, you're doing a really great job. And he said, I really think I should get something for it. And I wrote him back and I said, Jim, you don't get it. It's a monster magazine. There's other monster magazines. I'm grateful for what you
And
did.
there were other monster magazines from Famous Monsters.
There were.
So it's not like it's new to him.
But I started getting, he didn't send Christmas cards, but he sent New Year's cards every year, so we started getting them. And one year he said, Steve, I want you to buy Creepy and Eerie from me. And they're like, okay, let's talk. Well, I called him on the phone, and he laid out the plan. And he said, I want to make this affordable for you. So what I'd like is over 6 years, I'd like $500,000 per year and a helicopter.
That's my favorite bit, is the helicopter.
And actually, he pronounced it helicopter. He said, I'd like to be able to fly it down the beach. And I happened to already be working in entertainment licensing at the time, and I said, Jim, you've heard of Betty Boop? And he said, oh yeah. And I said, yeah, the Fleischer Studios just sold that to Mainframe Entertainment for $500,000 plus a 2-year job for the last of the Fleischer kids. And I said, and everyone knows Betty Boop. No one outside of us knows Creepy and Eerie. I said, I can't do it. And I mean, not only could I not, I wouldn't have done it. It was a terrible deal. And the guys who ended up getting Creepy and Eerie did not pay that kind of money.
Yeah, there was no helicopter involved.
No helicopter. In fact, when I told the new owner, he laughed and he said, gosh, that just sounds so much like Jim.
Yeah.
But it is Jim. But you know what? He really contributed a lot to our growing up.
100%.
Oh, we've got to be
Let me tell you
right.
something. Send him a New Year's card and tell him I'd love to have him come down and talk here.
I think he's about 150.
Yeah.
But he still does shows.
You showed up to San Diego, and I remember that.
San Diego,
But what do you guys, did you guys, I always was a little, I thought it was kind of silly when, in the band era came up, I go, oh, that's cool, and she's a host. But then they actually started doing an origin and made her a character, and it's near to you. Did you guys like the Vampiro stories?
With
No,
the Harris stories?
No, in
Oh.
original one, where there's just an alien from a planet and all that stuff. Just keep her a host. I didn't,
I didn't love the original origin story, but when they redid the origin story, I think in like issue 13,
Right.
and then Gonzalez did the art, I couldn't not love it.
yeah.
The original one, was it Joe Staten who did that original?
I don't even,
Tom
it
Sutton.
was
Tom
just,
Sutton.
Yeah.
Tom Sutton, yeah, did that original. That was goofy.
Yeah.
That just shouldn't have even happened.
Well, you know, when I licensed Vampiro from Harris a couple of years ago for merchandise and stuff, and I did the shower curtain available on my table. I put the Pratt Gonzalez poster, which is the iconic image of her. Behind that, I grabbed every image of the Gonzalez, original art pages I could, and made a montage of those, and kind of like, recessed in the back, so tone on tone things, so you can see the art while you're showering, going, man, that's fantastic work.
Darling, can I get a Vampirella shower curtain for our house?
I'll look you up.
If they don't sell out,
Yeah.
before you get back to the table.
and speaking of your monster scene, we ought to back up. I always, it was interesting. I think everybody end up buying famous monsters at some point, depending on your age and where you're at. And you're on you're on summer vacation, you're just desperate to get something and you buy, or you had a cover feature that you wanted. But a lot of us who started like getting into this were seriously, we jumped over to the Castle of Frankenstein and then banned and famous monsters. The Castle had
I mean, as we grew up, we grew out of that punny sort of
Yeah.
aimed at 14-year-olds.
and then the same thing with the Fantastic, you just kept on evolving, and you would, and over Starlog too, especially. But
Okay, so we've only got like 5 minutes
Yeah.
left, so we should probably ask if you guys have any questions or observations. Sam?
This is more of a comment, but you talk so much about the Captain Company. They used to sell those binders of famous monsters.
Yeah.
The story, the apocryphal story is that Harlan Ellison hated James Warren so much that he had one of the workers at the Captain Company smuggle him those binders out, so he wouldn't have to give Warren any of his money.
I believe that about Harlan. That sounds just
who
like.
he did not hate, it's
Yeah,
really
right.
good. Yeah. So,
Anybody else question? Yeah?
Yeah, so he's credited, Warren,
Yeah.
as doing the cover for Famous Monsters 12, which is a Phantom of the Opera.
Yes.
And he also produced all those Universal Monsters and even Munsters buttons,
Right.
right? They're big. That nobody knows who painted them. And they look a hell of a lot like that cover
That
from
cover.
12. Yeah.
Well, as I said, he did all of that type
Yeah.
design throughout the entire run of Famous Monsters. He was a very talented designer, and I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that, he, again, one of those guys who starts out as an illustrator
Yeah.
and finds a niche where it's like, well, here's where I can make the money, I would say he probably did those himself.
Yeah, I think he did, but I always ask, because I think somebody somewhere knows, right?
Well, let's couple the fact that they probably had the talent to do it, he was a penny pitching son
Yeah,
of a gun, so
which
he
is why there are
probably,
two versions of each of those buttons. right?
Exactly.
I think he, you know,
right, wanted to sell
lost
two.
the art.
Right.
No, it was weird. It's really strange, like how and where, like the years apart that they come across. Like, really, really odd.
But, you know, so that's a feature for him. What he probably had least of all in his life was time,
Yeah.
time to do it, you know? So that's why he probably only did one cover and just some of the merchandise and stuff like that. But of course, he was getting paid by other people to tell them what merchandise to make, you know?
And I always wondered how he cut the deal for the puzzles and the posters of the Bama and those sort of stuff.
Right.
Because in 1986, when I first met Basil Lewis and I had the puzzle, he's like, "What is this?" He'd never seen it before. I was like, "Oh, there's posters too." And he's like, "What?" And I've never.
But do you remember the creepy and eerie underwear?
Oh yeah.
I mean, how did that happen?
Yeah. Right.
I mean, that was done by
That
a
was
clothing
very strange.
manufacturer.
I had a,
And those were Ken Kelly pieces of art, and no
Yeah.
one can. I'm surprised he didn't punch him in the face.
my
He
freshman,
must have gotten something.
my freshman year of college, we had an eccentric professor. He loves genre stuff, and he knew about comics and all. He took us to Sparta, Illinois for a field trip for a comic book. When everything was being published out of Sparta, and I had to stay in a hotel room with a cheerleader, believe it or not. And then he was in another room. Now that I'm thinking, I was such a nice guy.
We don't need to inflate our resume.
Yeah, but I go over, I get up early so she could have her privacy and get ready, and I go over to the room, and he kind of worked out a little bit. He was a guy, he walked around, he sounded like Woody Allen because he's from New York, but he was a little hyper. But he had he worked out, and he was doing exercise in his underwear, and it was Famous Monsters of Film underwear.
I'm like, gosh, I hope this is going somewhere I don't expect it to go like that.
I had to throw that in when you put out underwear.
Guys, thank you all
Yes,
for coming.
thanks
This
so
is
much.
I love these kind of conversations.
Thanks again, and you know, if you love this panel, let somebody know, the co-chair, I don't know. And we'll do more, and you know, enjoy the weekend, and we will see you at the rest of the show. Thanks. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Around office here because she's taking me to physical therapy.
Did you?
Thanks. I'll be back in time for
Okay.
Well,
I have to do it